Crimson Desert lists the GTX 1060 as its minimum GPU requirement. But the demo footage we've seen from Digital Foundry was reportedly running around 4K 60 with RT and Ultra settings on a 7900 XTX, no upscalers used. So how do those two things exist at the same time? In this video, we are breaking down the Crimson Desert PC requirements and what kind of performance you should actually expect. And more importantly, on hardware like laptops, mid-range GPUs, or handheld PCs like the ROG Ally. The reason the specs are interesting comes down to three things. First, the minimum GPU is the GTX 1060, but the demo footage from Digital Foundry we've seen was running on a 7900 XTX at around 4K 60 with RT enabled. That's a massive performance gap between the minimum requirements and the hardware used to showcase the game. Second, one of the minimum GPUs listed is the RX 6500 XT, a card with only 4 GB of VRAM and very limited memory bandwidth, 64-bit bus to be precise. Even an Ally has 128-bit bus. And third, the trailers show extremely dense environments and large battles, which normally suggest much heavier hardware requirements. So the real question becomes, how does the game scale across such a wide range of hardware? So let's break it down. First, let's take a look at the official PC requirements. Minimum specs include Ryzen 5 2600X or i5 8500, 16 GB of RAM, GPUs like the NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1060 or the RX 6500 XT. Recommended specs move up to GPUs like the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 2080 or the RX 6700 XT. That already tells us something important about where the game sits in terms of performance. In most modern PC games, minimum specs usually target roughly 1080p at low settings around 30 frames per second, and mind you, the GTX 1060 cannot do any upscaling. So if the GTX 1060 is the minimum GPU, that likely represents the baseline performance target for the engine. But there is another interesting clue here. One of the minimum GPUs listed is the RX 6500 XT, a card that only has 4 GB of VRAM and a very narrow memory bus. That suggests the game engine probably has aggressive texture scaling, which allows it to run on lower memory GPUs. However, cards like the GTX 1060 with only 6 GB of VRAM may still need lower texture settings compared to the modern GPUs. But the real question for many people isn't desktop GPUs, it's how the game will run on handheld PCs. Now let's talk a bit about handheld PCs. Many people are wondering if devices like the ASUS ROG Ally can run this game. The Ally uses the AMD Ryzen Z1 Extreme. The CPU side of the chip is actually stronger than the minimum CPU requirements, but the integrated GPU performs at roughly half the performance of a GTX 1060. That means running the game at native 1080p will probably be unrealistic. A more realistic expectation would likely be something like 720p or 900p with FSR upscaling using low settings. Now things start looking much better once we move into modern laptop GPUs. For example, the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 5060 laptop GPU. At full power, the GPU performs roughly around the level of desktop 3060 Ti. That puts it comfortably above the recommended GPU requirements. So laptops with GPUs in this class should realistically be able to target 1440p high settings around 60 frames per second, and technologies like DLSS and frame generation can further help boost performance in demanding scenes. Another important factor here is the developer itself. Pearl Abyss previously built Black Desert Online, a game known for extremely scalable graphics. The game could run on relatively modest PCs, but it also had extremely demanding graphical modes for high-end hardware. If Crimson Desert follows the same design philosophy, we may see a very wide range of graphical settings that allow the game to scale across many different types of hardware. The demo footage was reportedly running around 4K 60 on AMD Radeon RX 7900 XTX Of course, in modern games, that doesn't always mean native 4K. Upscaling technologies like FSR are often used in demos to help achieve those frame rates. But in this case, it was running natively and FSR was only used for anti-aliasing. So based on the specs and the hardware we have discussed, here's a rough performance ladder. Of course, we won't know the real performance until the game launches, but based on the official specs and the demo hardware, Crimson Desert looks like it should scale across a very wide range of PCs. And when the game finally releases, I'll be testing it on laptops and handheld devices to see how accurate these predictions really were.